Hello, Coolman229 here, another Topic of the Week video. This week, Halloween month continues with another RWBY topic. This time, it's all about how I would rewrite Volumes 3 and 4. This week's topic was submitted by Tumblr anon, and their topic is: I know you're watching Season 3 and already read up spoilers for 3 and 4, and while I didn't hate the later seasons, I do admit I do dislike them compared to what came before. Tell me about how you would have handled Seasons 3 and 4. What changes would you have made, and if there are any elements you actually liked, what would you keep? Well, you see, Anon, I can actually explain to you why you didn't enjoy Volumes 3 and 4 as much as 1 and 2. And, this was sent to me while I was watching Volume 3, but I have watched Volumes 3 and 4 by now. You see, the thing with Volumes 3 and 4 is that there was a drastic shift in the priorities of the show. It used to basically just be, alright, there was kind of a story, but it wasn't really important. It was just sort of there to, facilitate the characters doing stuff. And I'm going to be honest, the plot for RWBY was never that good. At some points, it was just kind of dumb. And even a lot of parts of the show, it was just kind of not there. But Volumes 1 and 2 didn't really prioritize plot. It was mostly about the actions and the characters. So you had a lot of fight scenes, and then you had basically some character moments. Which there were actually some genuinely good moments in Volumes 1 and 2, like Yang talking to Blake in the dance arc, or when Jean admits to Pierre that he cheated to get into Beacon in Volume 1. There were some nice moments, but overall the story wasn't important. Volume 3 and 4, it's like, no, so the story is the most important part. That's why a lot of people are like, well, this is where the story really starts. Well, not really, but the story is bad. I mean, shoot, you can break the entire plot for Volume 3 by just asking one question. Why wasn't RWBY involved in the main plot? I mean, we find out in the beginning of Volume 4 from Salem that the silver eyes are the weaknesses of the maidens. So Osmond knows that RWBY has silver eyes. It's the first thing he says when he sees her. So why didn't he bring her in with Pyrrha going, okay, RWBY, you have silver eyes, this is the weakness of the maidens, and we want to train your silver eyes to fight against Cinder, and especially if things go south and she ends up with the full maiden powers, we want you to be there, to fight her. And also, you might want to bring her in and go, hey Pyrrha, RWBY has silver eyes, we're going to give you maiden powers, so RWBY's silver eyes are pretty dangerous, so if she looks at you, you might actually die. And even when they were going to transfer the powers, like, why didn't Ozpin bring the rest of Team RWBY in? Like, just all of Team RWBY, including RWBY with her silver eyes, and the rest of Team Juniper had it. You bring Jean in without even telling him what's going on. Just bring the rest of them in. He's already trusted Team RWBY, so shoot, if they had all of them there, the whole procedure would have gone on without a hitch. Then between Ozpin, Maiden, Pyrrha, and the rest of Team Juniper and Team RWBY, they would have freaking destroyed Cinder and they would have been able to stop what's going on. But if anyone made an intelligent decision in Volume 3, none of it would have happened. Particularly Ironwood, completely ignoring any suspicious things that are going on, despite the fact that he's head of security. And Volume 4? Volume 4 is a complete mess, trying to cram 7 plot lines into 12 episodes, and not even really giving any of them much attention. Because you have 4 for Team RWBY, and then you have Ren's whole backstory, which pretty much eats up the season, and Ren might as well be the main character of Volume 4. The rest of Team Rangers just kind of stand around doing nothing, or Nora's just standing next to Ren for his backstory. Then you have the villains, who pretty much do nothing except send Tyrion after them. And then you have Oscar, who's the most pointless character ever, which is so infuriating. If you want to have Ozpin in someone's head, it's dumb, but if you want to do that storyline, put him in RWBY's head, so that RWBY has something to do. She's already heading to Haven, so, why didn't Team Ranger just get on an airship? Or a train? Or anything, besides just walking for months? And the second you start thinking about the story, it just falls apart. And that really contributes to the unenjoyability of the seasons when the story is supposed to be the primary focus. Now, there are 2 things I want to go over real quick before I get into talking about how I would rewrite Volumes 3 and 4. There are things that I forgot to mention in the last couple topic videos. So, the first one, with Crow, I mentioned that Crow is biologically related to RWBY now. He is her biological uncle and Summer's brother. So I also forgot to mention, I can't believe I forgot this, He has the same semblance as RWBY, and Summer as well, though it's more advanced. He's, he's much older than her, and he's had that semblance for a lot longer. So he also not only teaches her how to fight with a scythe, but also how to master her semblance. Because there are a lot of cool things that, he can do with it, that, he can teach RWBY, and also teach her to, whatever her specialization with her semblance is. Because Crow can do all sorts of cool stuff, like, he can control the petals, because those aren't just for show. He can, like, send them places, he can just throw them out all around, and he can basically zip to any rose petal. Even if it's, like, on the other side of a door or something, he can pretty much mostly ignore physical boundaries and just zip to it. It makes him very dangerous, because if he throws all the rose petals everywhere, boom, he can be anywhere instantly. Summer had also a very interesting specialization in that she could turn those rose petals into basically mini knives by making them really sharp, and then she could swarm them everywhere. To say she was deadly in battle is a bit of an understatement. Super Mom, Slayer of Monsters, indeed. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was Cinder, and just one aspect of Cinder that I can't believe I forgot to mention this. But thematically, and the way she kind of fits in with the fairy tale aspects of the show, is that to fit in with the Wizard of Oz, theming, she is the Wicked Witch of the West. I mean, shoot, she pretty much looks the part anyway. Throw a hat on her, and she looks like a witch. I was rewatching Volume 1, and I was looking at the first episode like, okay, so we have a young girl with a dog. Alright, ruby rose, ruby slippers, silver eyes, silver shoes, and that one is from the Wizard of Oz book. Then you have her meeting Glinda early on in the story, and then you have her in conflict early on with the Wicked Witch of the West, who ends up having a small conflict with Glinda before disappearing in fire. And I just thought, it just felt like it fit. And she's also in conflict with Ozpin, who's basically the Wizard of Oz, so that just seems like it makes sense. Because she's supposed to be based off of Cinderella, from what I'm told. And yeah, well, she has glass heels, like, here you have basically Dorothy with Glinda the Good Witch, the Wizard of Oz, and Cinderella? That always just seemed odd to me. So yeah, she's just totally full-on the Wicked Witch of the West. Okay, so now to finally get into the actual storyline for Volumes 3 and 4. Now, I'm going to be skipping over a lot of minor details, and I'll be giving a few things up front of just things that are going to happen, so I don't have to go around and start explaining a lot of little things as I go through the story. I had an idea for these two scenes, and originally these were going to be like flashbacks in the story, but it just felt a little odd, so I decided to take the route that they had with the, the original RWBY trailers, the red, white, black, and yellow trailers, and just have something, or specifically the black and yellow trailers, and have something, a nice little few minutes thing, trailers that are like setting up the story. One of them would feature Adam, so that Adam gets a little significant appearance, and it would basically be picking up right at that end of Volume 2 when he shows up. So we see Adam go up to Cinder and Mercury and Emerald, and he basically makes a new deal with them of what they're doing, to pick up on his deal that he had made specifically with Roman. And, they basically hash those details out. Then Adam heads down into the Mountain Glen tunnels, just killing all the Grimm that he runs into, giving some action, looking for the survivors from the White Fang, and he finds them. He finds the ones that had gotten knocked off, and they were all huddled up in this one train car, and he gets them out, showing that yes, he is willing to go out of his way to help out his soldiers, because Adam may be a terrorist, but he's not heartless. There is a good person deep down in there. The next one would be about Roman, and it's basically just hashing out a deal that comes up several times in Volume 3, and trying to explain it several months after the fact when both Ironwood and Roman know it. Felt a little forced, so I decided to have this little short where Roman strikes a deal with Ironwood, which is super important to the plot, where he wants to come out and have a little sparring session with him, and whoever lands the first blow wins. And he's like, oh, well, Ironwood, if you win, I'll give you some information, and if I win, I get something nice for my cell. So Ironwood ends up reluctantly agreeing to him, because Roman is a tough nut to crack. And he's limited because he has to follow Veil law since they're in Veil, and he doesn't have as much power as he would in Atlas. And Roman knows this, and he doesn't let that intimidate him because Roman's pretty smart. And this will come up quite a bit of what his plans are, which basically sums up as he took a lot of the dust, not a lot of it, but he took parts of the dust that they stole for Cinder, and he hid them away in caches all over Veil. And this was in case he ever got captured, so that he could pull them and even some Paladin mechs in case he gets captured, so we can give them up and without actually foiling the whole plot. It also builds up some nice trust so that it makes it easier to escape. But so this is also going to come up later in the story when he does finally escape. So those would be released before Volume 3. So moving into the actual Volume 3, there's only one scene that I would take from the actual canon of Volume 3, and it's the very, very first scene with Summer at Summer's grave. And while there are some things that I liked, like Weiss and Blake's friendship moments, they will have stuff like that in Volumes 3 and 4, but a lot of that stuff is just going to happen throughout. And before I, delve too deeply into this, there's going to be something, throughout the whole series that I do want to sort of diversify which characters are interacting with. Like, you'll get more of characters like RWBY talking to Pyrrha, Yang befriending Pyrrha, Yang and Nora becoming friends, Yang and Ren actually doing some, training together. Stuff like that, where you have different characters interacting. And I'd want to have more of that, so particularly to build up the friendship that RWBY and Juniper have, and actually show that with the character interactions, more than just all being in groups. So, this starts off with RWBY at Summer's grave, and she's talking to Summer's grave, yada yada. And then it shows RWBY getting ready for Beacon with Yang, and they're, after the summer, they're, getting their bags packed, and they're ready to take basically an Airbus to Beacon. And, we get moments with Taiyang, so we get to see them, the adorable little family there, and him being, a nice dad, trying to get his daughters ready. And he shows him, getting ready for a new school year at Signal. Now, one thing that's really important to note about this scene, that this scene establishes, is that it establishes that RWBY has been doing hand-to-hand combat training with Taiyang and Yang, so that she's not completely useless without her weapon, like she was at the end of Volume 2, and she has an attack that doesn't rely on a running start. So, now, anytime RWBY doesn't have her weapon, she can actually fight. Even if it's not, like, as good as Yang is, because she doesn't specialize in hand-to-hand combat, she's not going to be useless. Now, we also get another scene early on where you see a mysterious new character is obviously breaking into some sort of government building. So he sneaks into this government building, and he finds a file, and he opens it up, and you see Cinder fall, and you see a vague, sort of blurry picture of Cinder with some information. And he gets pictures of it, he puts it away, and he sneaks out. Now, and then as you see the building that he was in, it's a Mistral government building, and it's like, oh, okay, so what's going on here? That'll be explained a little bit later. So, you get Team RWBY and Team Juniper coming together, and it's important because this also establishes that Blake had actually stayed with Weiss over the summer at one of the Schnee summer homes, because Weiss found out that Blake was going to sit in a motel over the summer, and she's just like, no friend of mine is ever going to sit in a dingy little motel. And she's like, it's fine. She's like, no, come with me to one of the Schnee summer homes, because she was going to stay there because she didn't want to go back to Atlas and see her father and her mother, because, yeah, she's going to stay away from them as much as possible. So that's something that's mentioned, and it's one of those little building up the friendships between Weiss and Blake. Because that is honestly, like, my favorite friendship between all the main characters. So they're gonna, do a little sparring session, and then Glinda is just like, okay, no, hold up, like, you two teams can spar under my supervision. So they have a little, they have a fun fight, and afterwards, we have, a nice moment with RWBY talking to Pyrrha about her weapon, because I want to really bring back in force RWBY's love for weapons. That was something that a lot of people liked, and I really liked it, and it sort of kind of faded off and isn't really as important, and that's something that is going to come up more, particularly with a new class that is coming up in the show, which, let me get that out of the way quickly. There are 3 new teachers that are introduced this season. There's Professor Marchant, Maurice Marchant. He's the guy in charge of the weapons building class, which RWBY obviously finds out about and takes. Then there's Dr. Dupin. He handles the advanced Grimm studies class, and he's a bit snooty, but he's actually right. He studied the Grimm for a very long time, so he knows what he's talking about. Interestingly enough, he's one of the few teachers there who isn't a huntsman. He's never had any huntsman training because he went to a university. Then the last one is Professor Habercorn, and he's important to the story, particularly with Blake, but I'll explain that a little bit later. He's the teacher of, hunter law and regulation, which is a pretty boring class, obviously. So RWBY finds out about the weapons building class and is basically just floored that she didn't find out about this, and then Yang's just like, hey, I thought you would find out about this because we were told about it at the orientation. And she's like, oh wait, no, you were brought in afterward. The orientation happened before you came to Beacon. And she's just like, so there's going to be several of those classes over the course of the show, while during the time they attend Beacon. Another important piece of information that we find out is that the Vital Festival got cancelled. That Weiss, Yang, and Coco were actually planning another festival that they call the Emerald Festival in place of it. And you're probably thinking, wait a minute, why is the Vital Festival cancelled? Well, you do find out not long after this. We get a scene with Ironwood and Ozpin talking, where Ironwood goes to Ozpin's office, and because he claims he's been trying to get a hold of him for several weeks, but couldn't. And this is where you find out why the Vital Festival got cancelled. I want to get this out of the way in the first episode because it's kind of important. So the council that decided to keep the Vital Festival going, the one we saw at the end of Volume 2, is the Remnant Council, at least 3 members of it, because you have the leaders for Vale, Vacuo, and Mistral, along with Ironwood representing the Atlas Council, making the official declaration to Ozpin that they're going to hold the Vital Festival. So Ozpin's just like, nope, I disagree with this. He doesn't argue with the council because that's going to be futile, but he calls the Headmaster's Council for a meeting. And this includes the Headmaster of Haven and the Headmistress of Shade. And he gets them together with a meeting with Ironwood, and they basically decide, alright, this is really, there's too much suspicious stuff going on. This is a big threat to the students. So they all decide 3-1 against Ironwood that they're going to cancel the Vital Festival for the safety of the students, because the Headmaster's Council has greater authority in matters related to the students of the academies. So Ironwood's pissed off about this, and you get more information going on, particularly information revealing that Ironwood has only been the headmaster at Atlas Academy for a few years, and he's overeager to prove himself after his sterling reputation as a soldier. So Ozpin is basically calming him down. He's like, James, we've been friends for 20 years. We were on the same team. You trusted me as your second in command at Beacon. Trust me now. This isn't an indictment on your abilities. This is just for the safety of the students. I will work with you to figure out what's going on with this. I just need you to trust me. So that ends up getting smoothed over, and Ironwood, his relationship with Ozpin, it kind of gets smoothed over again, and there's less conflicts than there was in Volume 2. So we have Cinder at Beacon annoyed that she's going to have to change her plan, so she makes, vague mentions of what they're going to do to set up stuff for the rest of the season. Another important thing here is that Weiss asks RWBY and Yang why they have different last names if they're sisters, so we get a sort of a comedic explanation of why. It's sort of an abridged version of the story that Yang told Blake, but cutting out the more personal details. Basically just saying that we had 2 different moms and our dad remarried. And it's like, oh, okay. So, it was just that simple, so that Weiss is on the same page. And then Yang remembers her confrontation with Raven, which, yes, it did happen, and that will come up and get explained. There are a lot of little moments that I have, and I've been calling them course corrections, and they're just little moments that are addressing issues that people had with Volumes 1 and 2, and sort of like slowly moving the story in the direction for, that I've been writing it in. So I want to get a lot of these issues that people had, these smaller ones, and address them fairly early on, so I can get those out of the way, so I don't have to constantly be dealing with things like, hey, why didn't Team RWBY help out Velvet in, Volume 1, and then try to answer that in, like, Volume 5? No. That stuff gets, addressed, and particularly you talk to Velvet about this, and you find out that Coco has been helping her out, so she has been getting help. I won't be going over a lot of those, because it would be too time-consuming, honestly. One thing for this first arc is that a guy comes in for the festival, and he's this world champion dancer from Mistral, and he's trying to, get Pyrrha to date him because, I'm beautiful and handsome, you're beautiful, date me. And then Pyrrha's just like, and John challenges him like, no, you don't get to date Pyrrha just because you want her to. She gets to choose who she wants to date. And he challenges Jean to a dance-off, which Pyrrha's just like, stop, I really don't care, I'm not going to do this. So Jean just takes it up, and he's gonna fight for Pyrrha's honor. So, he's like, so Pyrrha doesn't have to date someone she doesn't want to. And then Pyrrha's just like, oh dear. Because Jean doesn't quite understand that he's fighting for a date with Pyrrha, and Pyrrha's just like, And that's going to be part of the first arc. So we also get these mysterious people coming in, and it looks like they're looking for Ren, and like, oh no, what's going on? So we get into the actual festival, and they're actually students from Signal coming in. So if you remember that RWBY had friends from Signal, she gets to see them again, as well as introducing a new character named Talos. He's based off of the inventor from Greek mythology. And he was another student from Signal who attended class with RWBY. And he is, I'm just going to say it, he is RWBY's love interest, but, that's not really going to come up for several more volumes, because slow burn. And they have a very, like, Midoriya and Ochaku type of relationship. It very much starts off with a friendship before moving into something more, romantic later on. And he's going to come up in several parts. In particular, his character is going to be used to help develop parts of the story, particularly from seeing the events that the freshmen went through, like the Emerald Forest, from a different perspective. So the next important thing is that Crow comes in, and Crow's a lot nicer than his canon counterpart. He basically immediately goes to Yang and RWBY, and he's just like, yeah! And then they're just like, oh, Uncle Crow! So so there's some nice, adorable family moments with them, and you find out that he got fired from Signal, and RWBY and Yang are actually really upset because they thought he got sober, and finds out that no, he never was. He just didn't drink as much. But so he said that he's been doing fine, and because ultimately you find out that he has been working for Ozpin since he got fired from Signal, which happened around the same time that RWBY was brought into Beacon. So Penny comes in, and she basically tells RWBY that she wants to attend Beacon, and she's talking with her father about it. So eventually she is going to come into Beacon, and this is going to be more important later in the story. So a lot of the characters interact in the festival. You have stuff with Jean and Pyrrha, you have Ren and Nora, but most importantly, Kilroy, the spy that we saw in the government building at the beginning, comes in to talk to Ozpin. You find out that he is an agent of the Vale government. So yes, someone from Vale is breaking into a government building in Mistral. And Ozpin immediately says, don't tell me where you got this information, because I don't want to get dragged into something that might get me in trouble. So he gives them the information, so they finally have a name for the CCT intruder, Cinderfall. And Ozpin and Glinda look like they have some suspicious, looks at the picture, but it's kind of blurry and they can't really tell who it is. So that's mainly the information that they learn here, so they don't have to be calling her the CCT intruder, or the woman in red, or something vague like that. So we have a scene with Ren and Nora. In particular, this is where we get their backstory, and this backstory is basically that Ren has parents who are kind of like Toph's parents from Avatar: The Last Airbender. They're really rich, and just like Nora's family, and Nora's family is a bunch of rich Vikings, and Ren's family are very controlling and very traditional, and they basically just want Ren to come into the family business, and that's it. They don't want him to become a huntsman, but their family, going back several generations to his great-great-grandfather, they used to be a long line of huntsmen. And after his great-great-grandfather fought in the Great War, they kind of, that family after that sort of stopped. And Ren feels like it's his duty to uphold the family legacy and become a huntsman to protect people and fight the Grimm. And Nora spent years trying to convince him to, go to one of the schools, but he didn't because his parents forbade it. And they've known each other since they were like 4, and they grew up together because their families lived fairly close to each other. So ultimately, when they were like 16, 17, Nora finally convinced Ren to just up and leave. So then that's why they leave, and they take a ship and they go all the way to Beacon to basically join up there, and that's basically leads you to where they were first introduced in Volume 1. So we kind of get that all cleared out. And then these mysterious figures come up, and it's like, oh crap. There's a big oh crap moment because Ren and Nora know who they are. And that's going to lead into a big conflict. So the guy in charge of that group of 3, they're called the Guardians, he basically pretty much raised Ren. He trained him, to fight, and he basically finds it distasteful that he's fighting with guns, even though you find out that the guns that he has were actually his great-great-grandfather's weapons. So, like Jean, the weapons he has are antiques, though he's much better with them. Though the reason that he seemed a little bit clumsy at times in the Emerald Forest is because he's still fairly new with the weapons. So there's a big conflict with them, and you basically get more exposition about the characters through this. And ultimately, Talos comes in, he sees this conflict, because it does eventually devolve into just them fighting each other, and it ends up being 3-on-2, so he jumps in to help. And so there's a fight scene there. We also get a conversation with Ozpin and his sort of inner circle. He is Ironwood, Crow, Glinda, and Oobleck are all there discussing the information that they know. So Ozpin has a chess board, and he's putting the pieces, and they're like, okay, this is Cinder, Roman Torchwick, Neo, and then we have these pawns, and we're like, we have at least 2 mysterious people that we don't know about. And then, from what they can tell, Adam Toro. So Ozpin gets everyone in on the same page so that they all know, the CCT intruder's name was Cinder, they find out who she's all working with, Crow gives his reports, and we get these reports that we find out that Ozpin had Team RWBY and RWBY specifically write reports on the numerous times that they were involved in something serious, so that they refer to these reports for information, particularly with RWBY spotting the CCT intruder, so that they have at least some sort of physical description of her. And ultimately, that's just sort of everyone kind of coming together to figure out things. And what's important about the scene is that Ironwood mentions that he has a specialist coming in, and we all know who's coming in. Ozpin tells Oobleck to look over security tapes of all the incoming students that came from the other schools, because Ironwood suspected that some of them may be spies. So then they're like, okay, so we gotta find them. So then that's what Oobleck does, which comes up later. So we have a bit of time, and this will show up once every episode or so, where Ironwood goes and he basically interrogates Roman to try to get information, and you see they play that little game that I mentioned before. So Ozpin ends up looking at the cameras for the Emerald Festival, and he starts looking at just trying to see if he sees anything suspicious. And this is actually where he spots Talos, and he only kind of catches the tail end of the fight, so he doesn't actually do anything because it ends up ending before anyone can do anything. And then he looks at Talos' fighting capacity, and he ends up looking to Glinda, and then Glinda's just like, no. And he's just like, I want to bring him to Beacon. And she's just like, oh gosh dang it. So yes, Talos ends up attending Beacon. There's the big dance-off between Jean and this new guy, and Jean actually ends up losing pretty badly. But then Pierre's just like, alright, no, I'm not dating you because you're a douchebag. And he's just like, this guy's like, and she's just like, I'd rather date Jean. So she goes with him, and Jean finally clicks, oh, Pierre likes me. So yes, in the first little arc here, Arcos is canon, and we don't have to deal with any more misunderstandings between them. We get our first appearance of Adam talking to Cinder in disguise, and basically just establishing that he's like, he's getting kind of impatient with her, because he wants to strike, and she's like, no, 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 I have a plan, I have a plan. And there's going to be some more funnier moments with Cinder, because she's always such a serious and dreary character in Volume 2. So there's going to be some funny moments, like she vents her frustrations at the cancellation of the Vital Festival at a Dunka guy dressed as Professor Ozpin. So she's really intense about that. And, you know, so yeah, her and Adam will also have some funny moments, but Adam will end up being like the comically serious villain, where some silly stuff happens around him, but he just doesn't react because he's ultra serious. So after at the end of the whole festival arc, the most important thing that comes out of this is that Yang talks to RWBY about Raven, and specifically tells her what happened. So we get a flashback showing what was said during that conversation, which, to sum it all up, Raven basically told Yang, yeah, I left because I didn't want to deal with a family, and I got sick of taking care of a baby. And then she's like, yeah, I didn't want to live the quiet life on Patch because that was boring. So I divorced your dad and left. And Yang, who was hoping that there was just deep down that there was some good reason that Raven did what she did, is pissed. And there's a whole big fight scene that goes on. And this actually foreshadows Yang having a fight with Adam later on in the season. So we get RWBY basically giving Yang emotional support during this, because this was a huge deal for her. So going into the actual official school year, we do a few important things. Talos comes in to Beacon, and you get to see a lot of things that the main characters did as freshmen from the perspective of them being sophomores, particularly from RWBY. She sees Talos, and like she sees them in the all sleeping at the sleeping bags in that big hall, except she's not allowed because Port's just like, nope, freshmen only, and they're just like, oh. And one thing that's really important is that RWBY sees them go into the Emerald Forest. Ozpin lets her tag along, and he reveals some interesting things like, oh yeah, there's a lot more security that goes on in the Emerald Forest than they think. That whole line of, no, our instructor, or the teachers won't assist you, no, yeah, that was bullcrap. They have teachers all over the place just waiting, in the, waiting in the shadows to jump in if they have to. And so RWBY's just like, oh wow, and then Ozpin's like, I'm not gonna just throw a bunch of you to the wolves, quite literally, and just have you deal with Grimm, and she's just like, oh. He's like, no, I wanted you guys to sense the danger that you will be put in, but, this was just to test your capacity and your ability to handle dangerous situations, and then sort you into teams. The relics were just, those were just a little distractions so that they all had a goal. So really a big part of this next little arc is the fact that RWBY has to choose a second chair. Someone who will basically be her second in command, but she has a hard time picking it. So, Jean's immediately like, Pira, and then RWBY's just like panicking because she doesn't know what to do. And she'll be trying to figure this out over this short arc. And we actually get this nice moment with Coco mentoring RWBY and Jean as team leaders. So we get more of Coco and Team Coffee this season, particularly Coco. And they're gonna show up a little bit, and Coco will take something of a mentor role for RWBY and Jean. And Coco tries to help them, out, trying to give them some pointers of what to do. So another important thing that Talos does is he actually, he's sort of, he's kind of meek and easily bullied, because he's, a nerd. But, like Team Cardinal comes in, and they try to, they're obviously going to try to, do something stupid like they did with Jean in Volume 1, but Jean sees this and he basically puts a stop to it, and he's like, leave him alone, Cardin, and Cardin actually ends up sort of respecting Jean by now, so he backs off, and Talos ends up looking up to Jean. So Jean basically looks out for Talos. He kind of ended up being his senpai, and he's basically like, okay, I don't want this kid to make the same mistakes I made because I was an idiot, when I first came to Beacon, so I don't want him to get trapped with those. So he does teach him a little bit. So we see Jean's character evolve, and he ends up becoming a mentor himself, sort of looking out for Talos. The next part of the story is several classes, and they establish some information for the story, but it's a lot of it's not like super duper important. We get stuff with Professor Habercorn and him being the cool teacher, because if you want to basically look at what he looks like, just imagine the Good Hunter from Bloodborne. That's basically what he looks like, full huntsman gear. And he seems like the cool teacher, introducing himself by killing Grimm, and so he tries to spice up an otherwise boring class. One important thing about some of these series of classes over this arc is that RWBY asks Oobleck if there's anything that she can help with, and ultimately Oobleck asks Ozpin that RWBY wants to help, and Ozpin's like, yeah, she can go over security footage with you. She knows she's seen these students, and we'll see if her silver eyes can help. And Oobleck's like, alright. So yeah, we get her silver eyes playing a role in the story before the finale. So another important moment amongst these series of classes is that in one of their classes with Habercorn, you know, it seems like everything's going kind of good with him. He ends up having a mentor-teacher relationship with Blake, and Blake ends up being one of his best students. And, you know, he really likes Blake. Blake ends up becoming his favorite student. And then we get the bomb dropping. So we see that Habercorn talks to Velvet, and when he's talking to her, he's like, you know, Velvet, you know, you're doing good. You're pretty smart for a Faunus. And then everyone's like, did he just say that? And yeah, you find out Habercorn's got some unfortunate views of Faunus. He does kind of see them as just animals. And his character is a response to the criticism, and it's good criticism, that we don't see any good guys who display any sort of like negative opinions of the Faunus. It's always the bad guys or people who are supposed to be seen as, you know, jerks. And if this discrimination is so widespread to the point where Blake refuses to take her bow off even at Beacon, you know, we have to give some sort of reason to justify it, especially if this is such a big, important thing in the world. So Habercorn ends up making things a little uncomfortable, and when you're dealing with a storyline based on severe discrimination, yeah, things will have to be uncomfortable sometimes. Habercorn will eventually develop over a few volumes to become a better person, so you know, don't worry about that. He doesn't always have these unfortunate views. And one of the biggest important parts of the season is that Adam actually comes and meets Blake. And she's sitting in a cafe because she left because Yang was throwing a party, and she's just like, nope, and she leaves, goes to this nice cafe to read, and then Adam comes, and we get basically it's just an ideological discussion between the two, where, you know, Blake ends up, you know, standing up against his more violent behaviors, and, you know, he basically is just, he really wants to know why she left, and he's like, you know, we were doing good, and she's like, no, we were terrorists. So you get a big conversation between them that really establishes their views on Faunus rights. And we get some information, particularly stuff like Menagerie, which is established as a former prison island from the Great War, and yeah, it's kind of a dump. And you can see why the Faunus would be pissed about it. But ultimately, Adam leaves without a fight. He just has this very... He thinks... He's very sad that Blake decided to leave the White Fang. And he wishes that she'd come back. Because you do find out that Adam basically raised Blake from when she was a little girl, after her parents disappeared, which there's a good reason for that one. And he basically sees her like a little sister, and she's like family, even though he's like 10 years older than her. He is almost like a parent. So he will never actually do anything to significantly hurt Blake, because he deeply cares about her, and this is something that comes up later, and it's very, very important for his character and his relationship with Blake. Another thing is that we get a class featuring Dr. Dupin co-teaching with Port about Grimm studies, and this is one of those course correction things where we establish that the Grimm aren't necessarily attracted to negativity, and most of that is probably just based on myths and legends and superstitions rather than anything, because, you know, he ends up testing it, and you see an Ursa would rather go for one of those, you know, that sap from the Forever Falls, rather than, you know, going after someone like Blake, who's obviously, you know, very, you know, has a lot of negative emotions. And this is something I just want to end up tossing out, because it's so inconsistent anyway with the way it's portrayed, so I thought, why even really bother with that? You know, the world doesn't even incorporate that into the cultures of the world, so I thought so I ended up just dropping that, because it was more complicated having to completely rewrite the world itself in order to accommodate this, because it wasn't accommodated in the actual show, except for key plot moments, so I thought just to get rid of it. Another important class is with Glinda, with the combat, and specifically they discuss semblances. So you get to see everyone's semblance on display, and all the main characters, the 8 main characters from Ruby and Juniper, explain their semblance, explain some of the rules about them, and better late than never, really, for this, because you get to have you get to see what they all are, and you get to have them explained, and they discover Jean's semblance, which is this shield that he can create over himself that's nigh indestructible, and, you know, they're basically like, oh, this is a very handy semblance. So we get all that out of the way, and Glinda starts looking at Mercury in this class, and she starts thinking that he's actually acting really suspicious. So then she basically kind of puts a mental note that there's something weird going on with him. Ultimately, several things that, you know, Roman escapes with the help of Neo, and it's bombastic and over the top, as he has her play jazzy music as she breaks him out, just because he wants to be dramatic. So then they leave, and they end up going back to the base, where they're all like set up. So we find out that Cinder didn't know that Roman had taken that dust and hid it away, and a lot of that ended up going to Ironwood. So she's pissed and starts throwing accusations at Roman, and Roman basically was just like, hey, you know, I did that to save us overall, because you still have all this dust. So then Cinder basically pulls up the CCT, and, you know, and starts tracking a shipment that came in. So they end up basically planning an attack to get this shipment. So, and then, you know, Cinder starts becoming really, really paranoid about Roman, because she thinks he is betraying her. So she has Emerald and Mercury. She says that, you know, when they go steal the dust, you two are going to go with it. Because she's like, I don't trust Roman, and I'm not trusting Neo either. So after this, we get Roman talking about his backstory to Neo, and to put it simply, he had an abusive family. He ended up leaving, eventually joined up with Junior's gang. So at one point, he was one of those faceless goons. Eventually, he picked up a love of cigars, but you know, kind of felt like he was stuck there, so he ended up leaving to strike out on his own, and it eventually became, you know, the master thief that he is. There are more details in this. I'm giving the Cliff Notes version. And then you find out how he met Neo, and, you know, because he picked her up off the street by seeing her fight, because she lost her parents to a mugging, so she ended up having to survive on the streets, and so he sees her, and he picks her up, and he's like, you know what, I think we can work together. And you also find out that Neo's actually older than Roman by a few years. Which, everyone thought she was younger, but no, the joke is that she's actually older. We get an episode that, to sum it up, it's mainly an Arco state, but we get a lot of fun stuff that's going on, a lot of lighthearted stuff. Mercury and Emerald end up getting dragged by the various members of Ruby and Juniper, and you know, Emerald ends up being dragged along for a girls' night out to play pranks, and then Mercury gets brought in by a Sun and Neptune to basically go on a, you know, let's go party, and then they end up actually having fun and sort of befriending them. And they're just kind of sitting there afterwards. They're like, you know, we're going to end up betraying all of them. This episode is very much going to feature Pyrrha and a lot of development with her and her backstory, and all building on the stuff that we found out from the dance arc in Volume 2. And Pyrrha's celebrity is going to come up, where she's going to be swarmed by fans. People refuse to actually, you know, take money from her. They only let her take stuff, and all they want is a signature. It's very annoying for her, but, you know, she has Jean for comfort, and, you know, it's a lot of nice moments. So then we get Cinder's backstory, where Cinder sort of has these flashbacks to herself after Emerald and Mercury wonder why she's got such a beef with Ozpin, and she basically, you know, has these, you know, she gets mad at them kicks them out of the room, and she ends up having these flashbacks. And I talked a bit about that in my Cinder video, so I won't go over that. Important thing is that Cinder was on a team at Beacon with Ironwood, Glinda, and Ozpin, 20 years ago. And, she lost all of her family and basically just wanted a nice life for herself, but she was pretty weak and barely got into Beacon and lagged behind everyone, so she ended up getting into like dark magic and injecting dust, which ended up becoming an addiction, and eventually got her expelled from Beacon and arrested, and she ended up becoming a fugitive and setting her on the path that she is now. So now she wants revenge on Ozpin for turning her into the then headmaster. So, so this time we get Cinder's motivations for why she's doing what she's doing. So all right, now we understand what Cinder's deal is, and specifically why she's going after Ozpin and Beacon. One thing that's important is that Cinder, in the current time, leaves a message on the Beacon campus where she etches it in with fire, where it just says, "Here's to you, Ozzy." And when Ozpin comes up and sees it, he freaking freaks out. Like, this is one of the few times you're going to see Ozpin like go sheet white. Like he looks like he just saw a ghost, and he pretty much did, because "Here's to Ozzy" was something that Cynthia, which is Cinder's real name, used to say to him all the time. So, see, this basically was the confirmation that, okay, no, yeah, Cinder is Cynthia, and now he realizes that a lot of these suspicions, have been proven true, but he still doesn't particularly want to believe it, but, this freaks him out, and this is what Cinder was going for. She wanted to see him panicking. So she has, so she ends up having Emerald and Mercury go out and meet with Roman and Neo later that night to go out and get the last dust that they need. But unfortunately, Ren and Nora spot them, and they call Jean and Pyrrha in, and they all decide to go out. They run into Sun and Neptune, who are psyched to go out, and because they suspect that something's going to go on, so they're like, hey, some excitement. Because we haven't really had any of that. So to sum this up, they go out and they end up having a big fight on this highway, entirely on the highway, while Roman and Neo and Emerald and Mercury are trying to steal the dust. The important thing in this fight is that Pyrrha recognizes Mercury's fighting style and ultimately uses her semblance to just glue his boots to the truck, and then she unmasks him. Oh crap! It's Mercury. And then Nora ends up unmasking Emerald, and then she feels betrayed because they had just become friends. And then Roman, Neo, Emerald, Mercury eventually escape with all the dust. So they are basically busted. And during these events, I didn't talk about it chronologically, but during these times, RWBY is checking out security footage with Oobleck, and she doesn't see anything that's really suspicious. But she does say that, hey, I remember seeing some Haven students come into the main dorms. So they check that, and then RWBY notices, wait, that girl there, she had black hair, but she, on the camera, she had blonde. Oobleck's like, are you sure? She's like, yeah, she had black hair, and she's like, over her shoulder, and then Oobleck's like, that matches the description you gave for the CCT intruder, who also had conflicting reports on what she looked like from the Atlas soldiers. And then Oobleck's like, my girl, your silver eyes, you saw through an illusion. And then she's like, what? So we get an explanation that her silver eyes, at least at RWBY's base level, have the capacity to see through, illusions. So that scene back in Volume 2 when RWBY first meets Cinder, yeah, she saw straight through that disguise, and the reason that we see Cinder as normal is because from RWBY's perspective, that's just what she looks like. She never saw the disguises, and no one ever talked about what she looked like, so RWBY never thought anything was weird until then. So then they realize, oh crap, Cinder is here. So they basically find out that student and where they're staying, and Team Juniper calls in for Mercury and Emerald, and then they basically storm that room and they find Cinder, and RWBY gets a nice little fight with Cinder before she ends up escaping and just teleporting out of there. So now Cinder's busted on that. which this is going to lead into the actual final arc of the season. So there's a little story, an episode that's about Team RWBY trying to track down Emerald and Mercury and Cinder. But this story is it mainly introduces another character he's going to come in a little bit, but the main thing is that he's a love interest for Yang. But he's not a character who sticks around much because he's got his own storyline going, and he'll pop in and out of the story at different times. But specifically, his character is going to demonstrate that despite that Yang is very much interested in him, and he's actually interested in her, he's got a lot of stuff he needs to sort out before he has a relationship, and Yang is 100% accepting of this. So I really want to show that Yang is actually far more mature than a lot of people give her credit for. One of the main reasons I really want to include this is because I see a lot of people who think that Yang is just sort of a bimbo, and I'm like, no, you missed the point. So no, I want to make it very clear that even though she is kind of boy crazy, she is still mature enough to handle that, if a guy's not interested, then she's not going to force it. And she and this guy's name is Hei-Lang. They're going to have a pretty nice relationship as it develops, and this one's going to be the most slow of the slow burns. Particularly because it takes him a while to fulfill his goal, because he's trying to find his sister, and he'll come up, and this will come up with other stories later, but in particularly he'll come up and help out Yang, every once in a while. Hello. Sorry to interrupt this here, but this video is just so darn long, which is one of the reasons why it's taken me so long to get through. I've been kind of busy, and things just haven't been going as fast as I had hoped they would. When I recorded this topic, it was 2 hours, and which is better than the original recording that I did for it, which went to 4 hours, and I thought that's just way too long. But even at 2 hours, I'm going to split it up into 2 parts, like I did with my Voltron topic video, and I split that up into 3 parts. So I'll be posting a link for part 2 of this topic right here when I get that up. And I promise I'll be working as quickly as I can to get that up ASAP. Then I'll finish out the last topic I have for Halloween month. And then I'll be trying to work to get my next topic out that I have planned, and then get myself back on schedule. So again, I apologize for this being late, because I've actually been getting some messages of people asking where's the topic videos. So here it is, and I promise I'll be working as fast as I can to get these out ASAP. And thank you for watching.